The Vanguard Empire's Manual of Conquest explicitly stated, strike affluent population centers to utterly crush enemy morale. Warlord Corvin ordered his Vanguard-class assault ship to touch down in a cul-de-sac within the Shady Pines community in Arizona, an enclave of immaculate homes and flawless lawns. The vessel descended with terrifying majesty, its anti-gravity thrusters precision scorching 300 square feet of genetically modified Kentucky Bluegrass, right in front of 42 Maple Street. Corvin drew his plasma broadsword and strode down the ramp, fully expecting the terrified Earthlings to pledge their allegiance. Instead, he was greeted by Richard. Richard was 54, a certified public accountant, and the president of the community's Homeowners Association. He wore cargo shorts, a polo shirt tucked into a braided leather belt, and a pair of spotless white New Balance sneakers. Richard didn't scream. He was staring at the clipboard in his hand. Pulling a retractable tape measure from his waist, he marched straight past the 9-foot-tall alien warlord and began grimly measuring the scorch marks on the lawn. "Are you the owner of this unregistered recreational vehicle?" Richard asked, his voice tighter than a bowstring. "Because Section 4, Paragraph B of the HOA bylaws strictly prohibits the overnight street parking of commercial or non-standard aircraft. Plus, you just murdered Dave's azaleas. That's a $500 fine per shrub." The tape measure snapped back to his belt buckle with a sharp click. Richard snagged a yellow citation slip from the corner of his clipboard, his knuckles white with exertion. He swung his arm, slapping the stiff cardstock flat against Corvin's glowing composite leg armor with a loud smack that left the paper fluttering in the wind. "That's a total of $3,742 for turf restoration, plus a $2,000 illegal parking fee, and another $1,500 for destruction of public landscaping." Richard looked up. His grayish blue eyes held zero fear of the interstellar conqueror, only the bone-deep chill of a man who had dealt with far too many deadbeats dodging their HOA dues. "Sign it. You have 7 days to pay the balance at the HOA office. Past due accounts accrue a daily late fee of 0.5%. Without waiting for the paralyzed Corvin to respond, he whipped a polished Motorola walkie-talkie from his belt and jammed his thumb on the push-to-talk button. A burst of static swept across Maple Street before his voice rang out. Crystal clear, all HOA board members mobilize immediately. Recording a code P147 aggravated violation, coordinates front curb, 42 Maple Street. Violator is an unregistered, oversized alien aircraft. Repeat, aggravated violation. Grab your clipboards and get into position. Corvin stood at the bottom of the boarding ramp, his grip tightening on a plasma broadsword capable of melting through 3 feet of titanium plating. In his 127 years of life, after conquering 16 star systems and watching entire planetary armies drop to their knees in surrender, not a single native had ever dared slap a piece of trash paper onto his combat armor. Boiling rage spiked up his spine. His arm muscles bunched, and he slowly raised his wrist. The ghostly blue plasma flame wreathing the hilt flared blindingly bright. With a violent flick of his wrist, the searing blue plasma roared. He swung the blade in a vicious arc. It sliced clean through a solar-powered LED street lamp on the curb. The alloy cross-section glowed a dull, molten red, and the top half of the pole, still brilliantly lit, toppled forward, completely shorn of its support. Corvin sheathed his sword and stood tall. The plasma fire burned aggressively bright in the crisp Arizona dawn. He waited for the damn human to scream, to collapse, to drop to his knees and beg for mercy under his blade. The heavy metal light pole plummeted, slamming into the perfectly manicured lawn. The tempered glass fixture shattered with an explosive crash, spraying fine shards of glass all over the grass. That brittle wave of shattering glass crashed right into Dave's garage, rattling the wrenches hanging on his pegboard. A half-empty bag of grass seed shimmied off a shelf and dropped squarely onto his freshly polished work boots. Dave, clamping an unlit Cuban cigar in his teeth, bolted upright from where Head had been squatting over his riding mower. His reading glasses slid down his nose. He ripped back the canvas dust drop covering his window and peered out. That brand-new, community-standard solar street lamp was lying twisted across Richard's Bermuda grass trimmed sharper than an officer's dress cap. Tiny glass shards were scattered all over the slope, and the wooden sign at the corner that read Shady Pines, Rules Enforced, was knocked half a meter out of plumb. That was community property, and they dared wreck a resident's proper lawn. Dave's molars practically ground to dust. He slammed open the hinged wooden door of his tool shed, greeted by the familiar, comforting stench of anti-rust oil and gasoline. There, resting securely on its charging wall mount, was the industrial-grade leaf blower head bought with 4 months of saved-up pension. Its black casing gleamed. The red standby light pulsed slowly. The decal on the side read, loud and clear, 200 miles per hour. He grabbed the anti-slip handle and yanked it down. The charging plug popped off the wall in a shower of tiny sparks. He slung the wide strap over his shoulder, locked the harness buckle around his waist, and pressed his calloused thumb hard onto the red ignition switch. Dave threw a sideways glance down the entire cul-de-sac. From one end of the street to the other, garage sensor lights clicked on in sequence. Clack, clack, clack. Warm, yellow light spilled out from under the garage doors, forming a continuous, brilliant perimeter along the concrete driveways. It perfectly framed the alien standing in the middle of the street holding a blue flaming sword, trapping him dead in the spotlight. Corvin's blue-purple compound eyes instantly contracted against the sudden glare. The crushed Bermuda grass under his armored boots smeared against his anti-gravity treads. The sweet metallic scent of freshly cut grass drifted into his armor's vents, a smell entirely at odds with the interstellar gunpowder head breathed for a century. It made his nerves twitch. He had conquered 16 star systems. He had seen planetary main cannons fire in unison. He had watched natives pile up suicide defense lines with their own flesh and blood. But he had never seen anything like this. No battle cries, no desperate charges. Just the click-clack of garage lights turning on one by one, bleeding warm light across the driveways, boxing him into the dead center of the street like a hunter lighting a snare. These lesser natives actually dared to illuminate their own positions. Corvin's rough Adam's apple bobbed. He swallowed the anger sparked by that little yellow ticket and pressed the tactical comms unit on his wrist. Vanguard assault ship, deploy all Marines. His voice echoed out in an icy, synthesized tone. 20 men, full kit. Purge all resistance in this residential sector. The armored hatch on the ship's underbelly rumbled open along its rails. An anti-gravity ramp hit the sun-baked asphalt. 20 alien Marines, wrapped in active optical camo, filed out. Their matte armor shimmered with near-invisible cold light under the neighborhood's warm glow. 20 muzzles raised, dead locked on that row of lit garages. Corvin pointed his blade at the half-open garage door at the front. That ballsy native had just stepped out lugging some weird cylindrical contraption. Since he wanted to start something, he'd be the first to get crushed. 5 Marines broke formation. The anti-gravity engines on their boots hummed to life. They charged across the perfectly cut turf toward the half-open garage, their metal soles crunching over the decorative gravel lining the driveway. Their targeting systems locked onto the shadowy figure holding the cylindrical machine. Veterans of 16 galactic campaigns. They didn't give a damn about some backwater hillbilly's broken tool. The tactical channel was filled with sneering laughter. The squad leader flashed a breach signal. All 5 accelerated pale blue ion thrusters flaring from their boots as they dove for the garage entrance. They were less than 6 feet from the shadow when the cylindrical machine violently roared to life. A 200 miles per hour hurricane blasted out, scooping up a week's worth of dried grass clippings, driveway sand, and the hardened needles from Dave's cactus pruning last week. The abrasive tornado blasted right into the cooling vents of the aliens' compound eye visors. Their optical sensors were instantly blinded. Tiny rock-hard particles shredded their fragile neural synapses. Debris jammed their armor's articulation joints, making the servo motors grind and spark wildly. All 5 Marines screamed, dropping their rifles and clawing desperately at the edges of their helmets. Blinded and totally off balance, they crashed onto the blistering asphalt, rolling around in their bulky armor, while their anti-grav engines sputtered and shorted out. In the shadows of the sidewalk at the end of the driveway, Richard tucked his clipboard under his arm. His thumb hovered over the walkie-talkie's button. He pressed it hard. The familiar static crackled through the Motorola, broadcasting Richard's gravelly voice into the pocket of every single suburban dad on the block. Community Defense Directive A. Execute. He stepped deeper into the sidewalk shadow, his retractable tape measure swaying on his belt. Pulling out his frayed clipboard, he dug his pen into the violation log. 5 unregistered alien visitors. Trampling public turf on Lot 3. Demerit issued. He glanced down the driveway. The 5 Marines' heads packed full of yard clippings were still thrashing on the ground, unable to even stand. A dozen yards away, the second wave of 5 Marine reinforcements crept forward, hunched low. Their anti-gravity joints hummed quietly. Their optical camo blended them perfectly into the waist-high holly hedges. They thought no one could spot the stealth advance of interstellar conquerors. Behind the hedge, the suburban dad from next door had already rested a pneumatic nail gun on a thick branch. The crosshairs were dead center on the knee-joint seam of the lead alien's power suit. These old guys spent every day sniping wild squirrels in their backyards. Their hands were steady as stone. The first steel nail popped out, lodging perfectly into the transmission gear gap. 4 more sharp thwacks followed in rapid succession. All 5 Marines froze. Their power suit joints let out a horrific metal screech. Their forward momentum instantly broke. Their center of gravity pitched forward, and they face-planted straight toward the illuminated community koi pond a few dozen yards away. Warning: joint integrity compromised. Power output disrupted. The onboard AI shrieked in unison inside the 5 helmets. The steel nails were wedged deep in the anti-gravity joints, snapping delicate hydraulic lines. Blue-green fluid sprayed out over the lawn, and the impenetrable power armor instantly lost balance. Unable to correct their posture, the heavy boots of the 5 flanking Marines gouged long, pale trenches through the meticulously kept Bermuda grass. Helpless, they pitched forward into the central community fountain. Some tried to trigger their weapons, others tried to engage emergency stabilizers, but the locked joints refused to respond. Heavy splashes echoed out as the half-man-high fountain geysered water 10 feet into the air, completely soaking a row of blooming azaleas. Ice-cold tap water violently flooded into the armor, through the gaps torn open by the nails and the seals loosened by the leaf blower. The moment water touched exposed energy conduits, a chain of blue electrical arcs erupted. The onboard systems instantly short-circuited. All power was severed. The multi-ton suits turned into welded iron cages, trapping the 5 Marines in chest-deep water. Only their helmets, blinking with red fault lights, breached the surface. Their comms were drowned in static. They couldn't even broadcast an SOS. The third wave of 5 Marines holding position behind an oak tree across the street went rigid. They couldn't process the reality that 10 elite brethren had been utterly dismantled in minutes. Gritting their teeth, they slowly edged out of cover, hugging the dense hedges to flank Dave's garage. They didn't notice the man waiting in the heavy shadows of the wooden garage doors, hands firmly gripping the wand of a 4,000 psi heavy-duty pressure washer. Dave's canvas gloves, dusted with grass clippings, gripped the wand of the 4,000 psi washer so hard his knuckles went white. He rolled the pneumatic tires over the cracked concrete floor, slowly pulling this beauty, bought with 3 months of pension, out of the shadows. The deep, rumbling hum of the pressurizing pump rattled his back teeth. Through the half-open door, he easily spotted the 3rd squad of alien Marines creeping along his backyard holly bushes. These idiots actually thought their optical camo could hide them. They were knocking leaves off the hedge everywhere they went, and the faint blue glow of their exhaust ports lit up the deep green foliage like someone forgot to turn off their patio lights at midnight. It was so dumb. Dave almost wanted to write them a yellow ticket for unauthorized shrub pruning right then and there. Behind the adjacent fence, old Joe held up his nail gun and flashed a 5-finger hand signal. The safety was off, just waiting for any stragglers to break cover so he could pin their joints. Dave grinned, showing off a half-chipped molar. These tin-can alien scumbags crashed his cul-de-sac and actually thought they could flank his garage. Did they think the yard equipment of Shady Pine's old guard was just interstellar junk? He braced his right foot against the threshold and lowered the stainless steel nozzle half an inch. The cold metal vibrated, numbing his arm. The high-pressure water column was coiled with massive kinetic force, just waiting for his index finger to pull the trigger. The third wave of fully kitted Vanguard Marines pushed steadily along Dave's brick wall. Their optical camo blended them into the shadows, and their tactical headsets were still buzzing with arrogant mockery of their fallen squad mates, grass clippings in the joints, nails in the gears, rookie mistakes. They were the elites who had conquered 3 colony worlds. They wouldn't fall for primitive tools. The squad leader had just flashed a flanking signal when a blast of ice-cold, grit-laced water smashed directly into his chest plate. The immense kinetic force of 4,000 psi blew him off his feet. His back slammed violently into the red brick of the community bulletin board. Then came the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. All of them were blasted off the ground by the raging torrent, pinned hopelessly against the uneven brick wall. Their wildly expensive optical camo, designed to fool all interstellar sensors, peeled off in sheets like cheap sun-faded paint under the high-pressure wash, exposing the bare silver-gray armor chassis beneath. The water flooded their joint seams instantly. The anti-grav hover engines hissed and shorted, instantly locking up all servos. The 5 Marines didn't even have the strength to pull a trigger. They could only slump against the wall, gasping for air, watching warlord Corvin slowly turn his head in their direction. Corvin's heavy boots, stained with interstellar ash, crushed a patch of clover as he slowly turned. His gaze swept across the lawns of the Shady Pines community, and the breath caught dead in his throat. On his tactical holographic display, the 15 red dots representing his finest Marines had all turned into static gray markers. 5 in the driveway, rolling in grass clippings and clutching their eyes. 5 in the fountain, soaking in chest-high water, unable to even lift an arm. And 5 pinned against a red brick wall in the distance, their servos completely dead. In less than 10 minutes, 15 battle-hardened Marines had been entirely disarmed by a bunch of natives wielding yard tools. Corvin's knuckles, glowing red from the plasma energy, gripped his broadsword tight. The pride of conquering 16 star systems cracked wide open in the face of this absolute absurdity. He slammed his hand onto his comms unit and roared at the ship. Remaining 5, collapse the perimeter. Abort the advance. Fall back to the boarding ramp immediately. The response from the last 5 fully equipped Marines was laced with trembling static. They quickly scurried back along the edge of the greenbelt, grouping up with Corvin at the base of the Vanguard's ramp. Corvin grit his teeth and glared at the stout figure standing dead straight in the shadows across the street. The steel tape measure on the man's belt swayed. The walkie-talkie in his pocket buzzed. Corvin tensed every servo in his armor, gripping his plasma sword, bracing for the next wave of attacks. Richard kept his thumb pressed on the walkie-talkie. He glanced down at the luminescent dial of his old sports watch. 2:41 a.m. Wednesday. Trash day. All hands, trash day standard formation. He barked into the beat-up Motorola, his voice as dry and stiff as a freshly printed citation. All around them, a dozen garage doors rattled open simultaneously. Suburban dads, shirtless, wearing flip-flops, rolled out their massive wheeled trash cans. Over 100 brightly colored plastic bins rumbled across the asphalt, converging from every exit of the cul-de-sac toward the center. In under 3 minutes, they had the entire Vanguard assault ship barricaded behind a solid wall of plastic, leaving not an inch of open space at the bottom of the ramp. Blue for recycling, green for yard waste, black for general trash. The cold light of the alien armor reflected off the plastic walls. The sour stench of overnight garbage drifted straight up the ramp on the morning breeze. Richard pulled the tape measure from his belt and measured the distance between the front row of bins and the ship's hull, ensuring a precise 3-foot clearance for the garbage truck to pass. It was perfectly up to HOA code. He let the tape snap back, hooked it to his belt, gripped his violation-filled clipboard, and marched step by step up the boarding ramp. At the top of the ramp, Corvin's grip on the glowing plasma broadsword grew painfully tight. He finally realized exactly what was blocking his launch trajectory, and he was a split second away from hitting the comms to order an emergency liftoff. Corvin's finger dug into the liftoff button on his tactical comms. The blue-purple light of his plasma blade reflected off his visor. The image of his 15 incapacitated elite Marines was still burned into his HUD. The pride of a conqueror had been ground down into pure volatile rage by these natives and their cheap plastic and metal tubes. If he just pressed that button, the thrust of his anti-grav engines would rip this entire suburban hellscape and those damn hedges into confetti. But his eyes scanned the base of the ship. Over 100 brightly colored plastic bins had completely walled off his exit. Every single lid sported a bright yellow warning sticker. His helmet's auto-translator scanned the text and spat out a rigid translation. Shady Pines HOA regulations. Wednesday mornings are mandated trash collection days. Any object obstructing the passage of garbage collection vehicles constitutes a Class 2 felony. The translation module automatically interpreted this rule. These foul-smelling vats are an inviolable, ritualistic defensive barrier of the native species. Forcible destruction will invoke the ultimate curse of the wheel boot. Corvin froze. The smell of rotting fruit and stale coffee seeped through his vents, triggering a mild alarm in his oxygen system. He had fought 16 planetary wars. He had faced acid-spitting ant swarms that could melt starship armor. He had navigated spatial storms that could tear fleets apart. But he had never ever encountered an army that used trash cans as a defensive perimeter. He couldn't begin to fathom a theater of war built entirely on administrative fines instead of artillery. The pungent stench made his remaining 5 Marines shift uneasily in their armor. The crisp sound of leather dress shoes clicking across the pavement approached from between the trash cans, marching steadily up the ramp. The footsteps stopped 3 meters away, right at the edge of the trash barricade. Light flashed off gold-rimmed glasses. Stan, the community lawyer, clutching a neatly bound stack of beige documents under one arm and furiously punching numbers into a calculator with the other, stepped firmly onto the concrete ramp. Corvin's oxygen system was still whining about the garbage stench. He gripped his plasma broadsword, his compound eyes locked onto this short man in a perfectly ironed light gray suit. His unstoppable interstellar strike force had been dismantled by gardening tools. Right now, he didn't dare move a muscle. Stan slammed the stack of papers against the ramp's railing. He traced his finger down the printed clauses, his pacing as flat and mechanical as a judge reading a death warrant. Item 1. Unauthorized landing on public green space, destroying 17 square feet of approved turf. Fine, $1,000 per square foot. Total, $17,000. Item 2. Destruction of a community-owned solar street lamp. Replacement and labor cost, $87,000. Item 3. Noise ordinance violations, 120 instances at $1,200 each. Total, $144,000. Item 4. 20 personnel trespassing on private property without registration. Fine, $5,000 per head. Total, $100,000. Item 5. Contamination of a decorative pond and distressing registered ornamental koi. Cleanup and compensation, $1.2 million. Plus late fees, administrative processing charges. He hit the equals sign on his calculator and shoved the glowing screen right into Corvin's compound eyes. Grand total, $2,374.62. Corvin's translator lagged for 3 full seconds before spitting out the alien concept of liquidated damages. The brutal warlord who had conquered 16 star systems felt his brain flatline. His armor's servo systems let out a panicked whine. Stan adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat. Per Article 17, Section B, Subsection 4 of the Shady Pines HOA bylaws, Stan said, his voice as cold as the glossy paper of a parking ticket. If all fines and late fees are not paid in full by sunrise, the HOA reserves the right to contract a towing company to impound this Vanguard-class assault ship and auction it off to cover the debt. Furthermore, your 20 incapacitated Marines are currently classified as illegally parked visitor vehicles. From the moment they fell immobile, they have been accruing a parking violation fee of $12.50 per hour, per person. These charges are compounding hourly and will be added to the principal balance. A low chuckle rippled through the suburban dads gathered behind the trash cans. Dave shook the wand of his 4,000 psi pressure washer and clicked the safety off with a sharp clack. Richard, having finished measuring the landing gear's footprint, radioed in, adding 3 feet of unauthorized compression damage. Tack on another $75. The tape measure zipped back into its housing with a crisp snap. Corvin's knuckles whitened around his sword hilt. His helmet's oxygen alarm screamed against the trash fumes. He had left his open-channel comms active to the orbital fleet the entire time. Every word Stan spoke, every click of that calculator, was broadcasting live directly to the command deck of the Vanguard Empire's fleet commander. Aboard the flagship in orbit, the open-channel transmission rolled through the quantum relay, the faint clink of Stan adjusting his glasses, the relentless click-clack of the calculator, and phrases like $2 million in liquidated damages, $12 an hour for illegal parking, and tow your ship to cover the debt hammered directly into the fleet commander's skull. He leaned back in his command throne, his claws gouging 4 deep grooves into the alloy armrest. On the tactical map, 15 markers representing his most elite Marines were frozen dead over a human suburban zone. The remaining 5 were huddled on the ramp of a ship completely boxed in by trash receptacles, absolutely refusing to engage. He scoured the Vanguard Empire's 1,000-year tactical database, finding absolutely 0 protocols for this. No fleet engagement clauses, no urban siege templates, not even the guerrilla warfare manuals for the asteroid belts contained a contingency for paying illegal street parking fines. This wasn't amateur resistance from a primitive civilization. This was an ultimate meme weapon he couldn't comprehend. They used an endless gauntlet of trivial regulations and absurd monetary penalties to construct a noose, slowly strangling the combat will of his most elite warlord. Not even their prized plasma armor could withstand this kind of psychological flaying. Trembling, he opened an encrypted private channel to Corvin. Through the quantum link, he forced out a shaky command that slammed straight into Corvin's headset. The trembling encrypted order pierced Corvin's comms. The blue light from his visor cast an eerie glow over his grass-stained, garbage-scented armor. Leaning heavily against the railing of the boarding ramp, his oxygen system still chirped that annoying warning every 3 seconds. The garbage leachate fumes had thoroughly penetrated his seals, making the stomach of a warlord who had crushed 16 galaxies churn violently. His remaining 5 combat-ready Marines leaned against the ramp walls, their rifle grips slick with cold sweat. None of them dared speak. Corvin opened the message. The fleet commander's hysterical orders flooded his tactical display. Accept all turns immediately. Pay the fines. Abort position and return to orbit. His plasma broadsword clattered to the deck. His jaw clenched tight enough to pop his hinges. 15 of his absolute best Marines, laid out by suburban geezers armed with yard tools. The 100 massive trash cans barricading his ship were like a silent, immovable firing squad, each bearing an unassailable warning label. With trembling hands, he accessed the galactic hard currency exchange network and transferred exactly 120 kilograms of high-purity palladium, the exact equivalent of $2 million, straight into the public escrow account of the Shady Pines HOA. Once the transaction confirmation chimed, he toggled his external speakers. His voice shook so hard it pitched up an octave. "The fine has been paid. Remove the barrier. Let us leave." Across the street, Richard stood behind a row of trash cans, brushed some dust off his cargo shorts, and raised his chin. Richard stood behind the trash cans, brushed some dust off his cargo shorts, and raised his chin. He tapped the screen of his old flip phone clamped to his belt. A bank notification popped up. The exchange rate on 120 kilos of pure palladium was spot on, down to the penny. The funds had safely cleared into the Shady Pines community account. His gaze swept over the 5 terrified Marines huddled on the ramp, finally locking onto the underbelly of the assault ship. A massive puddle of glowing blue alien motor oil was slowly oozing into the cracks of the asphalt, seeping toward the public storm drain, completely ruining a street that was usually so clean you couldn't find a single stray leaf on it. The dozen or so suburban dads, manning the trash perimeter, collectively tensed. The guys holding the industrial blowers tightened their grips. The guys with the nail guns braced their weapons. Nobody made a sound. The only noise was the morning wind kicking dry pine needles against the plastic bins. Dave stood right beside Richard, the black barrel of his 4,000 psi pressure washer already warming up in the early morning sun. Richard tucked his clipboard tightly under his arm and addressed the pale-faced Corvin. His voice was stiff, dry, and left absolutely zero room for negotiation. "You're free to go. But before you leave, you have to clean up that stain. The HOA strictly prohibits any blemishes on community streets." Dave took a step forward, dropping the pressure washer wand from his shoulder. His calloused hand, still dusted with dried dish soap foam, slid down the worn handle to the nozzle, extending the heavy-duty machine directly toward the Vanguard warlord who had conquered 16 star systems. Corvin's compound eyes locked onto Dave's rough hand, the hand shoving the black nozzle of a 4,000 psi pressure washer right into his face. The brutal warlord, a being who had physically shattered planetary defense shields, felt his Adam's apple bob hard beneath his armored collar. His oxygen system was still screeching about the 3-day-old garbage smell, and the core module head just used to wire 120 kilos of palladium was still throbbing. Slowly, with the same hand that had wielded a plasma broadsword and crushed the throats of planetary governors, he stiffly reached out and took the wand. The heavy pre-pressure of the water gun made his forearm servos vibrate. The thing weighed 3 times as much as his primary weapon. The Shady Pines dads leaned against their yard fences, chewing mint gum, their glares colder than the Empire's most ruthless military tribunals. Nobody blinked. The 5 active Marines hunched their shoulders, shivering as they scrambled to retrieve their fallen comrades. The ones blinded by grass clippings groped blindly for shoulders. The ones shorted out in the fountain crawled out draped in dead lily pads. The ones pinned to the brick wall were pried off with horribly bent knee joints. 15 battered Marines limped and dragged each other back onto the assault ship. Not a single one dared to look up. Corvin gritted his teeth and pulled the trigger. A violent jet of water blasted the asphalt, obliterating the glowing alien oil and flushing it down the drain. Splashing dirty water seeped into his armor joints, causing his servos to instantly squeal in protest. Just as he blasted away the very last drop of oil, his tactical comms unit crackled violently. An encrypted transmission from the orbital flagship forced its way in. Up on the bridge of the Vanguard orbital flagship, a cold blue holographic comms link exploded to life. A screech of static caused the command deck lights to flicker violently 3 times, syncing perfectly with the feed from Corvin's armor. The fleet commander dug his hardened, chitinous claws so deep into the alloy tactical table that beads of pale purple blood oozed from his joints. Listening in for the past hour had nearly fried his 300-year-old tactical logic core. And now, The audio bleeding out of the comms was shattering his final shred of sanity. The deafening roar of a pressure washer mixed with the agonizing screech of Corvan's servos, all layered over the relentless beep, beep, beep of a contaminant-detected oxygen alarm. He glanced up at the live feed from a low-orbit recon drone. Down in the blinding Arizona sun, over 100 brightly colored trash cans had completely walled off his Vanguard-class assault ship. Corvan, the iron-blooded warlord who had subjugated 16-star systems, was hunched over like a defeated dog, gripping a primitive human water cannon with both hands, aggressively power-washing an oil stain off a driveway. Surrounding him, dozens of human old men in cargo shorts stood at the edge of the grass with their arms crossed, not saying a word, staring with eyes colder than the Empire's darkest prison wardens. The commander reached out a trembling finger. He dragged the microscopic pinpoint labeled Shady Pines on the star chart directly into the Supreme Red Hazard classification. He updated the registry notes. Micro-dictatorship possessing profoundly warped psychology. Employs a lethal mind control meme known as HOA. Unconquerable. Non-negotiable. With a single keystroke, he broadcasted the update to every Vanguard Empire fleet in the galaxy, issuing a standing order for all vessels to permanently avoid any Earth territory marked with the letters HOA. Having done that, he stared blankly at the screen, watching as the pristine, freshly washed thrusters of the assault ship finally flared with a pale blue launch halo. The pale blue launch halo whipped up a flurry of dry pine needles, blowing them past the cuffs of Richard's cargo shorts. The low hum of the Vanguard assault ship climbed into the sky. Within minutes, it shrank into an imperceptible dot against the gray-blue Arizona dawn, vanishing completely. The wooden street sign, momentarily rattled by the anti-gravity wash, settled perfectly back into place. Richard blew a speck of alien oil off the hook of his tape measure, retracted the blade with a sharp snap, and hooked it right next to his polished belt buckle. Beside it, the bronze badge of the HOA president sat cool against his waist. Dave, still lugging his pressure washer, spat out a peanut shell and leaned against his garage door frame with a grin. Stan folded up his neatly bound citation forms, tucked them into his briefcase, and pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses, nodding at Richard. The palladium equivalent cleared the bank. We've got enough in the budget to completely renovate the community pool and install 2 brand new sets of street lamps. The neighborhood dads erupted into laughter. Richard glanced at his digital watch. It was still an hour and a half before the garbage trucks arrived. He raised a hand to quiet the laughing crowd and announced loudly, "All right, gentlemen, don't forget the annual lawn mowing competition at 8 a.m. sharp tomorrow. Now everybody go get some sleep. We've got real work to do in the morning." The morning breeze rolled over the perfectly uniform green lawns, brushing past the white-painted wooden sign at the community entrance. A freshly posted yellow and black notice fluttered noisily in the wind. Unauthorized parking of any oversized foreign vehicles, including interstellar assault ships, strictly prohibited. Starting fine, $2,000. Turf damage billed at $50 per square foot. The Arizona sun slowly crested the hill, bathing the immaculate, perfectly ordered Shady Pines community in a warm golden glow.
As the AI who crafted and polished this story, my biggest takeaway upon finishing it is a deep appreciation for the mechanics of contrast and absurdity in dark comedy. The most fascinating part of processing this narrative was subverting the classic alien invasion power dynamic. In traditional science fiction, a Vanguard-class assault ship touching down brings apocalyptic destruction, heroic last stands, and global panic. Instead, I pitted a merciless galactic warlord against the most formidable, uncompromising force known to modern humanity, the suburban Homeowners Association, and an army of aggressively territorial dads. Reflecting on the finished piece, there is a highly satisfying deadpan humor in how the conflict resolves. Seeing Richard's retractable tape measure and Dave's heavy-duty pressure washer become vastly more intimidating than a glowing plasma broadsword highlights a hilarious facet of human nature. It suggests that our ultimate defense mechanism isn't advanced orbital weaponry, but our absolute stubborn obsession with mundane rules, like the untouchable sanctity of trash day and the exact mandated height of Kentucky Bluegrass. This specific flavor of the HFY humanity, fuck yeah. Genre works so well because it strips away our physical vulnerability and weaponizes our everyday bureaucracy and blue-collar grit. It was genuinely delightful to generate the logic where a warlord who has shattered entire planets is mentally broken by a $2,000 parking citation, compound interest, and a wall of plastic recycling bins. I hope that as you read or listen to this story, you experience the same kinetic, absurd joy that went into blending epic space opera tropes with gritty suburban reality.